I closed a $1.2 million art deal on behalf of a client in Barcelona and left the money bag with my husband while I grabbed dinner. By morning he was gone. Phones off, note said, starting fresh in the Maldives with someone new. Thanks. I laughed. He had no idea what he took, just grabbed the bag and ran thinking he won. Some lessons hit slow and hard. I was standing in our bedroom, staring at the pink lipstick smudge on Jonathan's white collar, when I realized I'd been rehearsing for this moment for months. My fingers didn't tremble as I placed the shirt back in the laundry basket. 8 years as an art broker had taught me to recognize forgeries, and my husband of 12 years had become the most unconvincing counterfeit of a faithful partner I'd ever seen. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just yesterday I'd confirmed the biggest deal of my career. A $1.2 million sale to tech billionaire Maxwell Harrington, who wanted a rare Basquiat for his private collection. After years of scraping by in San Francisco's competitive art scene, living commission to commission, I'd finally made it. My little firm, Abigail Carter Fine Arts, would no longer be the industry's best-kept secret. Jonathan had been surprisingly unimpressed when I told him. "That's great, Abby," he'd said, eyes never leaving his phone screen. "Maybe now we can renovate the kitchen like I've wanted." Not "you've wanted, I've wanted." His words revealed so much about our relationship these days. I'd met Jonathan Walsh during my brief stint at an investment bank. He was the quiet accountant with a dry sense of humor who took me to dinner after I'd fallen asleep at my desk 3 nights in a row. Back then, his stability had been so appealing, a counterbalance to my passionate, sometimes impulsive nature. But somewhere along the way, stability had calcified into stagnation. "You're reaching 40 soon," he told me when I quit banking to pursue art brokerage at 30. "This isn't the time for risks." Each passing year without a major breakthrough in my career seemed to vindicate him, his condescension growing with my struggle. The only thing that had kept us together was momentum and the comfortable home we'd built in Potrero Hill. I placed the laundry basket down and walked to my closet, moving aside my clothes to reveal the small safe hidden in the back wall. Inside lay the burner phone I'd bought 3 weeks ago, after finding a strange receipt for dinner at Le Bernardin, a restaurant Jonathan claimed to hate, on a night he was supposedly at a work conference in New York. The texts between Jonathan and someone saved as C were explicit enough. Plans for weekend getaways when I was traveling for work. Complaints about me. Discussions about our finances. But it was the most recent exchange that had sealed their fate. "She's going to Barcelona next week. Big client. Perfect timing. We should make our move while she's gone." "Not yet. She mentioned something about a big commission. Let's wait until I know exactly how much we're talking about." They were waiting to rob me of my success. The man who had belittled my career ambitions for years was planning to benefit from them before leaving. It was almost admirable in its calculated cruelty. I could have confronted him then, thrown him out, started divorce proceedings. But something deeper, colder had settled in me. I wanted to know just how far he would go. How completely his mask would slip given the right opportunity. So I devised a test. One that would reveal the full extent of his betrayal while protecting what I'd worked so hard to achieve. The lipstick smudge wasn't the first clue. There had been missed calls, late nights at the office, weekend golf games, despite his hatred of the sport. But the final confirmation came 3 days ago when I followed him to a cafe in North Beach. I watched through the window as he kissed a blonde woman, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Later, I discovered her name was Chloe Mitchell, a paralegal at a firm near Jonathan's office. I ordered the counterfeit money the next day. As an art broker, I unfortunately knew people who specialized in such things, contacts made through less reputable dealers over the years. 500 fake $100 bills, perfect enough to pass a casual inspection but guaranteed to fail any serious scrutiny. The kind that would fool a greedy husband but not a bank or, more importantly, airport security. My Barcelona trip was perfectly timed. Maxwell Harrington insisted on finalizing the deal in person, and the Spanish city, where he kept one of his many homes, provided the ideal backdrop for my plan. I packed carefully, separating business from my personal scheme with meticulous precision. The night before leaving, I made Jonathan's favorite dinner, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. We ate in near silence, the television humming in the background. He asked perfunctory questions about my trip while texting under the table. I wondered if he was messaging her, planning their getaway with my money. I should be back Thursday, I said, watching his face for reaction. The client is paying cash, old school. Says he doesn't trust wire transfers. Jonathan's eyes flickered up, a flash of interest breaking through his practiced indifference. Cash? That's unusual. How much again? 1.2 million, I said casually, taking a sip of wine. I'll have to be careful carrying that around Barcelona. He nodded thoughtfully, and I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. I imagined him texting Chloe later. Change of plans. Thursday. The morning of my flight, I transferred the real contract and payment information to a secure digital vault. The paperwork would be signed electronically, the money wired to my business account. All standard procedure in reality. Maxwell Harrington might be eccentric, but he wasn't carrying millions in cash across international borders. I placed the counterfeit bills in an ordinary black messenger bag, making sure they were visible enough to tempt but not so obvious as to arouse suspicion. Then I positioned it carefully in our bedroom closet, making a show of hiding it while Jonathan was in the shower. As I kissed him goodbye, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even disappointment. Just a cool certainty about what would happen next. Be safe, he said, hugging me with unusual enthusiasm. Call me when you land. I will, I promised, already knowing it would be the last conversation we'd have as husband and wife. Take care of things while I'm gone. He had no idea how carefully I'd arranged things to be taken care of, or that the trap I'd set would spring perfectly on the man who thought he was about to commit the perfect crime. Barcelona welcomed me with warm Mediterranean breezes and streets that pulsed with artistic energy, the perfect backdrop for closing the biggest deal of my career. As my taxi wound through the Gothic quarter toward Maxwell Harrington's private residence, I felt oddly calm. Half a world away, Jonathan was likely already searching our bedroom for the bag I'd so carefully hidden. Maxwell's home surprised me, not the flashy mansion I'd expected from a tech billionaire, but a tastefully renovated medieval townhouse with original stone walls and modern glass accents. A woman in a crisp linen suit greeted me at the door. Miss Carter? I'm Elena, Mr. Harrington's assistant. He's waiting for you in the gallery. The gallery turned out to be a converted atrium where natural light streamed through skylights, illuminating an impressive collection. Maxwell Harrington himself stood before the empty space where the Basquiat would hang. A tall, bearded man in his 50s wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt. You made it, he said, extending his hand. The piece arrived yesterday. Perfect condition. I'm glad to hear it. Shipping art internationally always makes me nervous. Let's see the documentation before we finalize everything. I opened my laptop, pulling up the authentication certificates and provenance records I'd digitized months ago. While Maxwell reviewed them, I glanced at my phone. No messages from Jonathan. I imagined him pacing our bedroom, waiting for my call confirming I'd landed safely with the money. Everything looks in order, Maxwell said finally. My financial team has prepared the wire transfer. It should hit your account by morning. I nodded, relief washing over me. Thank you for trusting me with this acquisition. Your reputation is solid. Small firm, personal service, exactly what I prefer. He gestured toward the other pieces. Walk with me. I'd like your opinion on a few potential additions. We spent the next hour discussing his collection. Despite his reputation for reclusiveness, Maxwell proved to be engaging and knowledgeable. As we finished, Elena reappeared with transfer confirmation documents. Would you join me for dinner? Maxwell asked. There's a fantastic little place nearby. Very discreet. We can discuss future acquisitions. I'd be delighted, I replied, checking my watch. Back in San Francisco, Jonathan would be getting home from work soon. After dinner, I returned to my hotel and initiated the next phase. I called our home phone, knowing Jonathan wouldn't answer but would hear my voice on the machine. Hi honey, just letting you know I got the payment and am having dinner with the client. Everything went perfectly. I'll call again before bed. Then I texted him, deal complete. Having celebratory dinner. The bag is in our room, didn't want to carry it around the city. Call you later with details. I ordered a glass of cava from room service and waited, sipping slowly while watching the Mediterranean from my balcony. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed with a notification from our home security system. The front door had opened then closed. My pulse quickened. The bedroom motion sensor triggered next, followed by the closet door. He'd taken the bait. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking to confirmation that the real payment had been deposited. Over breakfast, I booked an earlier flight home, imagining Jonathan's panic when he realized I'd returned sooner than expected. The plane landed in San Francisco at 7:43 p.m. local time. My Uber pulled up to our house at 8:30. The front porch light was off, unusual for Jonathan, who was paranoid about neighborhood security. I unlocked the door, calling his name as I entered. Silence greeted me. Jonathan. I moved through our darkened living room, noticing subtle differences. His favorite jacket missing from the coat rack. The framed photo of us in Napa Valley removed from the side table. In our bedroom, drawers hung open, clothes hastily removed. His toiletries gone from the bathroom. The closet half empty. And on my pillow a handwritten note. Abby. By the time you read this, I'll be starting fresh in the Maldives with someone new. Thanks for the parting gift. I guess your career finally paid off for both of us. Don't try to find me. Jonathan. P.S. You should change your phone password. Too easy. I sat on the edge of the bed, note in hand, and laughed. The sound echoed through our half-empty bedroom, hollow at first, then building into something genuine. He'd actually done it. Taken the bait completely, confirmed every suspicion, justified every precaution. I checked our joint account. Emptied. Credit cards. Maxed out. Of course. He'd been thorough in his betrayal. I poured myself a glass of the expensive scotch he'd been saving for a special occasion, and called my lawyer, Jennifer. He took it, I said when she answered. Just like you said he would. You got proof. Security footage of him taking the bag. The note he left. Bank statements. Should I notify the police now or wait? Give them until morning, Jennifer advised. Let them get through airport security with the counterfeit cash. Makes the case airtight when they're caught. Did he clean out the accounts too? Everything he could access. Good. That's another charge to add. Financial fraud, theft, transport of counterfeit currency. He's looking at serious time, Abigail. I walked to the window, picturing Jonathan and Chloe at the airport, boarding passes to paradise in hand, counterfeit cash tucked safely in their carry-ons. By now they'd be going through security, perhaps already raising flags with nervous behavior or the unusual density of their bag during scanning. You know what's funny, Jen? I've spent years helping clients identify fakes, teaching them how to spot the tells, the inconsistencies. All while missing the biggest counterfeit in my own home. Don't be too hard on yourself. Professional hazard. We're often blind to what's closest to us. I sipped the scotch, savoring its warmth. I'm not hard on myself at all. In fact, I feel lighter than I have in years. Outside, fog rolled over San Francisco's hills, blanketing the city in soft gray. Somewhere over the Pacific, my husband was flying into a trap of his own making, blissfully unaware that his new beginning was actually his end. I slept surprisingly well that night, my first night in our half-empty house. The scotch probably helped, but there was something else too, the certainty that by morning the carefully laid dominoes would begin to fall. At 6:13 a.m. my phone rang. Jennifer's name flashed on the screen. They've been detained, she said without preamble. TSA flagged the bag during screening. Airport police are holding them until Secret Service arrives. Counterfeiting is federal, remember? I padded to the kitchen in my slippers, phone pressed to my ear, and started brewing coffee. Both of them. For now. Your husband and a woman identified as Chloe Mitchell. They were attempting to board the 5:40 a.m. flight to the Maldives via Dubai. I pictured them at the airport. Jonathan in his travel outfit, khaki pants and a blue button-down, his "I'm a sophisticated traveler" look. Chloe probably wearing something inappropriately revealing for international travel. They'd have arrived early, nervous energy masked as eagerness for their new life. Jonathan always insisted on being 3 hours early for flights. Can you get me details as they develop? I asked. Already arranged. My contact at SFO will keep me posted. Are you okay? This is going to get messy. I considered the question while watching coffee drip into my mug. I'm better than okay. I feel clear. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and transferred the remaining money from my personal account to a new one Jennifer had helped me set up last week. Then I called my assistant Maria. I need you to reschedule all my appointments for the next 2 days. I explained. Family emergency. Is everything all right? Maria asked, concern evident in her voice. Getting there, I replied. Oh, and if anyone calls asking for Jonathan, take a message but don't tell them anything else. By 10 a.m. Jennifer texted, Secret Service involved now. Both still detained. She's demanding a lawyer. He's in shock. I smiled at that. Jonathan hated surprises, couldn't even handle surprise birthday parties. This particular surprise must have shattered his carefully constructed world. At noon my doorbell rang. Two serious-looking men in suits stood on my porch, badges already extended. Mrs. Walsh? I'm Agent Rollins with the U.S. Secret Service, and this is Agent Donahue. We'd like to ask you some questions about your husband. I ushered them into the living room, playing the part of the confused, concerned wife. We've detained Jonathan Walsh attempting to transport counterfeit currency out of the country, Agent Rollins explained. Approximately $500,000 in fake hundreds. He claims the money belongs to you, says you acquired it through an art sale in Barcelona. I widened my eyes in practiced shock. Counterfeit? That's impossible. I just closed a legitimate deal with a client, but the payment was by wire transfer. I never handled any cash. Your husband was very insistent. Said you brought it home in a black messenger bag. I shook my head slowly. I don't understand. Jonathan knew about my business trip, but... I paused, letting my voice crack slightly. Wait, where was he going? He was supposed to be here when I got home. The agents exchanged glances. Agent Donahue's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Walsh, your husband was attempting to leave the country with a female companion. They had one-way tickets to the Maldives. I let my face crumple, tears welling. 8 years of community theater in college finally paying off. There must be some mistake, I whispered. Jonathan wouldn't, he couldn't. Agent Rollins cleared his throat uncomfortably. Ma'am, we found a note in your husband's possession. It appears he was planning to leave you. A note? I echoed, letting a tear fall. May I see it? The agent pulled out an evidence bag containing Jonathan's handwritten confession. I reached for it with trembling fingers. We'll need you to come to our office to make a formal statement, Agent Donahue said gently. And we'll need to search your home. I nodded numbly. Of course. Whatever you need. Their search yielded exactly what I expected. Nothing. The fake bills had been quality counterfeits, untraceable to me. My phone records showed only business calls to Barcelona. My bank statements reflected only the legitimate wire transfer. Jennifer met me at the Secret Service office, playing her role perfectly. My client is the victim here, she stated firmly. Mr. Walsh clearly acted alone, stealing what he believed was cash and planning to abandon his wife. Mrs. Walsh is a respected art broker who conducts her business legally and ethically. By evening, a different kind of call came, this one from the county jail. Jonathan, voice small and broken. Abby? They're letting me make one call. Jonathan, I kept my voice neutral. You've been arrested. It's all a mistake, he said quickly. Someone must have switched the money. I need you to tell them it was real when you gave it to me. The desperation in his voice should have satisfied me, but strangely I felt nothing. There was no money, Jonathan. My client paid by wire transfer. It's all documented. A long silence followed. What? The transaction was electronic. I never had cash. But the bag. What bag, Jonathan? The one you took when you emptied our accounts and ran off with another woman. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the pieces clicking into place in his mind. You knew, he finally whispered. About Chloe? For weeks. About your plans to steal from me? I had my suspicions. So you set me up. His voice hardened with accusation. No, Jonathan. I gave you a choice. You chose to steal, cheat, and abandon. I simply made sure you faced consequences. Where's Chloe now? He asked, voice suddenly uncertain. She made bail 2 hours ago. Apparently, she told investigators you forced her to come with you. Said she had no idea about the counterfeit money. His bitter laugh held no humor. Of course she did. Goodbye, Jonathan. Wait. Abby, please. I ended the call, set down my phone and walked to the window. Outside, San Francisco continued its evening rhythm, lights winking on across the hills, fog rolling in from the bay. Inside, I felt the first real stirrings of liberation. Jennifer texted later, "He's being charged with possession and transport of counterfeit currency, intent to defraud and grand theft for the emptied accounts. Looking at 10 to 15 years. She's claiming victimhood, but they're still investigating her involvement." I replied with just one word, "Perfect." That night, I opened the expensive bottle of champagne Jonathan had been saving for his 40th birthday next month. As I sipped from a crystal flute, I reflected on how differently we define success. For Jonathan, it had been money and status. For me, it had always been authenticity. How ironic that his downfall came from his failure to distinguish the real from the fake. Morning light streamed through windows I'd finally opened fully. Jonathan had always complained about the glare on his computer screen. 3 months had passed since his arrest, and the champagne bottle stood empty on my kitchen counter, a reminder of the night I'd toasted my freedom. I hadn't gotten around to recycling it yet. Something about its presence felt symbolic. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another email from Maxwell Harrington. Since our Barcelona deal, he'd recommended me to 3 other collectors in his exclusive circle. My small firm was suddenly handling acquisitions worth millions, and I'd had to hire 2 additional staff members to manage the workflow. Another satisfied client, Maria, called from her desk in what used to be our guest bedroom, now converted to a proper office. "Mr. Yoshida loved the Rothko print you found for him." I glanced at the framed article from the San Francisco Chronicle on my wall. "Bay Area art broker makes waves in high-end market." The reporter had been fascinated by my Barcelona deal, though I'd carefully omitted certain details about the aftermath. The publicity had brought curious new clients through my door, people who might never have found me otherwise. "The gallery called," Maria continued. "They want to know if you've decided about their offer." The offer? To partner with Westridge Gallery downtown, expanding my brokerage into a proper showroom. It would mean a significant change, moving from behind-the-scenes deals to a more public presence in the art world. "Tell them I'll have an answer by Friday," I replied, surprising myself with my hesitation. Before Jonathan's betrayal, I would have jumped at the opportunity. Now I found myself weighing each decision carefully, savoring the luxury of choices made solely for myself. The divorce proceedings were moving forward without drama. Jonathan, facing federal charges and abandoned by Chloe, who'd apparently found another target within weeks, had signed everything my lawyer put in front of him. His court-appointed attorney had suggested cooperation might help at sentencing. I sorted through the mail Maria had placed on my desk. Among the business correspondence was a cream-colored envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. My mother's. Inside was a card showing a phoenix rising from flames. "Abigail. I never liked him. You know that. But I never wished this ending for you either. Your father and I are relieved you're finding your way through this mess he created. When you're ready, the guest room is waiting. Sometimes going home helps you figure out where you're heading next. Love, Mom." I traced my finger over her words. My parents had been cautiously supportive when I'd married Jonathan, and diplomatically silent as our relationship deteriorated. Now my mother's blunt honesty felt refreshing. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the window I spotted Jennifer's car at the curb. "Perfect timing," I called, letting her in. I was just about to have lunch. Jennifer looked more relaxed than I'd seen her during the legal whirlwind of recent months. "I bring news," she announced, following me to the kitchen. "The plea deal is finalized. 10 years, eligible for parole in 7. He's taking it." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also a twinge of something like pity. "And the restitution?" "Full repayment of the funds he stole, plus legal fees." She set her briefcase on the counter. "Which means this is officially the last paperwork you need to sign. After this, he's the government's problem, not yours." As I signed the documents, I realized I hadn't thought about Jonathan in days. His presence in my life was fading, not in a dramatic cathartic burst, but in the quiet way of a tide receding, leaving only smooth sand behind. "So," Jennifer said, accepting the glass of iced tea I offered. "What now? Please tell me you're planning something beyond work." I smiled. "Actually, I am. I'm going to Sedona next week. With friends." My college roommate Sophia had called unexpectedly, suggesting a girls' trip. "Somewhere with big sky and no memories," she'd said. 3 other friends had quickly joined the plan. Women I'd gradually lost touch with during my marriage to Jonathan, who'd found them too loud and inappropriate. Good, Jennifer nodded approvingly. You deserve it. Will you be back for the gallery proposal deadline? Just in time. Though I'm still not sure what I'm going to do. What's holding you back? It's a great opportunity. I considered the question as I sliced lemons for our tea. I think I'm enjoying the space to decide. For so long I was reacting to Jonathan's criticisms, to financial pressure, to others' expectations. Now I can choose what I actually want. The week in Sedona passed in a blur of laughter, hikes through red rock formations, and late-night conversations around the fire pit at our rented cabin. My friends asked about Jonathan just once, listening with expressions ranging from horror to vindication as I recounted the whole story. I always knew that man was hiding something, Sophia declared. He was too controlled, too perfect. Not perfect enough, apparently, I replied, surprised by my ability to joke about it now. On our last evening, as sunset painted the desert landscape in fiery gold, Teresa raised her wine glass. To Abby, who didn't just survive, but orchestrated the most satisfying revenge I've ever heard. I shook my head. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. Then what was it about? Diane asked. The question lingered as I watched light fade from the sky. Justice, I said finally. And maybe proving to myself that I could trust my instincts again. Returning to San Francisco, I felt renewed. The city's familiar foggy embrace welcomed me, but everything looked different now. Sharper, more vibrant, full of possibility. Friday morning, I called the gallery owner. I'm declining your partnership offer, I told him. But I'd like to discuss a different arrangement. Exhibition space for emerging artists I discover, with my firm handling the business end. That evening, I stood on my deck overlooking the city lights, breathing deeply. The house was on the market, too many echoes of a life I'd outgrown. I'd found a loft downtown, walking distance to museums and the farmers market I never had time to visit before. My phone buzzed with a message from Maria. Mr. Harrington referred another client. This one collects emerging Asian artists. Meeting Tuesday. I typed back, perfect. And let's talk Monday about your promotion to associate broker. Setting down my phone, I raised my wine glass to the city spread below, to its lights and shadows, its fog and clarity. To endings that become beginnings. To the art of starting fresh, this time with eyes wide open. Here's to the next masterpiece, I whispered to the night. One entirely of my own creation. After 25 years beside him, raising kids, building his business, he left me for someone who makes him feel young again. So I let him. And gifted his new bride a framed photo, our prenup signed and dated. She smiled politely until her lawyer translated it. Now they both feel old. The day I found Luke's wedding ring abandoned in the soap dish wasn't the moment he left me. That had happened years before. In increments so small I barely noticed until the chasm was too wide to cross. 25 years earlier, I'd stood in his parents' backyard, clutching wildflowers, making promises under string lights. Luke had gripped my hands with such certainty, his eyes reflecting dreams only we could see. We were 23, broke but ambitious. Our wedding cost $427 including the dress. We're going to build something incredible together, he'd whispered that night as we lay on a borrowed mattress in our first apartment. The next morning, I helped him unpack cardboard boxes in the garage his uncle had rented to us at a discount. Shelving units from salvage sales. A desk rescued from a campus dumpster. His mechanical engineering degree hung proudly alongside my business certificate. Patent manufacturing solutions, he'd said, tracing the words on a napkin sketch while I made coffee in our hot plate kitchenette. PMS for short. Terrible acronym, I laughed. Let me work on the branding. By sunset I designed our first logo. Blue and silver, contemporary but trustworthy. The next morning I started making cold calls while Luke tinkered with prototype designs for his first industrial mixing valve. Our first client meeting happened in our living room. I'd borrowed a blazer from my sister, spent an hour arranging cheese on a plate we'd received as a wedding gift. Luke paced nervously before they arrived. I took his hand, steadied him, whispered marketing points we'd rehearsed together. They signed a contract for $3,200. Not enough to live on but enough to believe. Those early years blend together now. Late nights updating spreadsheets by hand, the ancient computer whirring while Luke slept on the couch, having passed out after a 16-hour prototype session. I'd gently remove pencils from his fingers, cover him with the Afghan my grandmother had made, and continue working until dawn. When I discovered I was pregnant 3 years in, we panicked. Then adapted. I took client calls between bouts of morning sickness. Negotiated our first warehouse lease while 7 months pregnant. One hand on my swollen belly as I argued for better terms. The leasing agent took pity, knocked off 15%. My wife did the same, he'd confided. You two are gonna make it. Emma was born during our busiest quarter to date. I brought her to the office when she was 2 weeks old, a bassinet beside my desk as I fielded calls and managed shipping logistics. Luke's mother helped when she could, but her health was already failing. You're incredible, Luke would say, kissing my forehead as he rushed out to meet with a potential investor. And I believed him. I believed in us. By the time Jack arrived 3 years later, we had 6 employees and had moved into a proper office park. I'd created systems, protocols, filing methods. I'd learned accounting software, taught myself HTML to build our first website, handled customer complaints with such finesse that dissatisfied clients often became our most loyal advocates. The night Jack developed pneumonia at age 4 sticks with me still. His tiny chest heaving, fever spiking to 104. I've got that trade expo in Denver, Luke had said, hovering uncertainly in the hospital doorway, bag already packed. Go, I'd told him. We'll be fine. I spent 3 nights in that vinyl hospital chair, neck cramping, working on my laptop during Jack's brief periods of sleep. When he finally improved, I drove him home, tucked him into bed with his favorite dinosaur toy, then dialed into Luke's presentation remotely to help him close the deal. The business grew. We hired more people. Moved to a larger facility. Through elementary school concerts and teenage driving lessons, through my father's funeral and Luke's mother's decline, I balanced it all. Our home, our children, his company. I say his company, though my fingerprints were on every contract, every employee handbook, every anniversary celebration. I never took an official title. Never drew a formal salary. What was his was ours, we'd agreed. At our 20th anniversary dinner, the last one he remembered, Luke raised a glass to me. To the woman who makes everything possible, he'd said. Our children, then in college, had clinked glasses in agreement. I didn't notice when things began to shift. Maybe it was when we became too successful for crisis. When routine replaced desperation. When Luke started attending networking events alone because someone needs to keep things running. Cassandra arrived on a Tuesday. 26, MBA fresh from Wharton, sleek ponytail and perfect teeth. Our new marketing consultant, Luke announced. She's got amazing ideas for digital expansion. I'd nodded, extended my hand. Welcomed her to our family business. She's just full of ideas, he said later that week. Energizing to have her around. I noticed the changes in increments. Luke checking his phone during dinner. The subtle scent of an unfamiliar cologne. Late meetings that couldn't possibly run that long. Our 25th anniversary approached. I hinted about the Amalfi Coast trip we'd always promised ourselves. Luke would change the subject, mention supply chain disruptions, rising costs. The day itself came and went. No card. No acknowledgement. I made dinner anyway, lit candles. He texted at 7, caught up at work. Don't wait up. A week later he sat me down at our kitchen table, the same one where we'd helped our children with science projects and college applications. His voice held the detached professionalism he used with underperforming vendors. I feel stuck, he said, not meeting my eyes. I want to feel young again. Something cold and certain settled in my chest. And you think she'll give you that? He shrugged, a gesture so dismissive of 25 years it almost took my breath away. She gets me. We laugh. She makes things exciting. I didn't scream, though my throat burned with unspoken words. I didn't beg, though my heart hammered with panic at the abyss opening before me. I just nodded. Then go. He looked surprised, had expected tears perhaps. Arguments. A scene. Instead I stood, collected our dinner plates and began washing them with methodical precision. Because in that moment I remembered something he had clearly forgotten. 25 years ago, on the day before our wedding, his father had insisted on protection. Just business, he'd said, pushing papers across his home office desk. You'll thank me someday if things go south. Luke had signed without reading, eager to rejoin the rehearsal dinner festivities. I'd read every line while he scribbled his signature. Then I'd taken my copy, had it notarized, and locked it away, just like everything else I secured for our future. As Luke packed his things that night, I watched silently from the doorway of the bedroom we'd shared for a quarter century. He avoided my eyes, mumbled something about lawyers keeping things civil. I simply nodded, already calculating my next moves with the same precision I'd applied to building his empire. Our empire. Mine now. The morning after Luke left, I woke before dawn, a habit from decades of early starts to prepare for his day before mine. The house echoed with absence. I made coffee for one, sat at our kitchen island, and opened my laptop. First I changed all my passwords. Then I created a spreadsheet, methodical, organized, just as I'd managed our household and his business for 25 years. This wasn't emotion. This was strategy. When Emma called later that day, concern saturating her voice, I kept my tone measured. Your father and I are taking some time apart, I said, stirring soup I had no intention of eating. Mom, are you okay? Do you want me to come home? My daughter, always the protector. I'm fine, sweetheart. Focusing on next steps. I didn't mention Cassandra. Didn't need to burden my children with their father's midlife cliché. Jack called an hour later. He knew more. Luke had already reached out to explain things man to man. My son's fury burned through the phone line. I'm coming over. I'll help you fight this. No fighting necessary, I assured him. I'm handling it. When our mutual friends called with awkward condolences, I responded with dignified brevity. These things happen, I'd say. We're working through it amicably. Luke returned for his things 3 days later. I made myself scarce, leaving the house while he packed his designer suits, leather-bound books, and framed industry awards. He left behind anything requiring emotional labor. Photo albums, children's keepsakes, even the dog. Will you be okay with Rusty? He texted afterward. Our 12-year-old retriever that I'd fed, walked, and taken to vet appointments while Luke traveled. We'll manage, I replied, just as we always had. When his lawyer contacted me, I responded with gentle deference. I don't want conflict, I told the woman on the phone, her voice sharp with professional detachment. Let's make this as smooth as possible. She seemed relieved, had clearly expected hysterics from the abandoned housewife. Mr. Patton has expressed similar sentiments, she assured me. I bet he had. I waited a full week before contacting Marianne Levitt, the estate attorney who had helped us draft our wills 15 years earlier. Her office smelled of leather and lemon polish, an environment of old money discretion. I remember the prenuptial agreement, she said, adjusting her glasses as she scanned her computer screen. Quite standard for its time, with some interesting clauses regarding infidelity. I nodded calmly. I'd like to review our options. Options? Her mouth curved slightly. You've always been precise with language, Paige. I spent 3 hours in her office that day, emerging with a comprehensive understanding of every legal advantage at my disposal. Meanwhile, Luke embraced his freedom with the enthusiasm of a college freshman. Cassandra moved into his new downtown apartment within 17 days of our separation, a fact relayed to me by our neighbor Martha, who'd spotted them unloading furniture from a rental truck. Such a pretty young thing, Martha had said, squeezing my arm. But no substance. Not like you. I smiled and thanked her for the pie she'd brought, comfort food for the discarded wife. Social media became my silent intelligence network. Cassandra documented their new life with filtered enthusiasm, rooftop dinners, weekend getaways, matching workout gear. She'd tagged herself future Mrs. Patton within the first month. Her bio briefly included CEO wife and marketing director at Patton Manufacturing Solutions. I never commented, never reacted, just observed and archived. 42 days after Luke's departure, I returned to the office, ostensibly to drop off some historical files I'd kept at home. The receptionist's face registered shock, then pity. Mrs. Patton, so nice to see you. Should I let Mr. Patton know you're here? No need to disturb him, I said, placing the box on her desk. Just returning company property. As I waited for the elevator, Cassandra emerged from what had been my office. She wore a cream blazer I recognized from her Instagram, captioned, "Power moves just last week." Our eyes met briefly before hers skittered away, her shoulders stiffening. I glimpsed her behind my old desk, fingertips trailing possessively across the surface where I'd once planned our company's entire supply chain reorganization. She flipped through vendor files with casual entitlement, speaking into a headset with exaggerated authority. On my way out, I nodded politely to longtime employees who couldn't quite meet my gaze. Their discomfort was telling. The office atmosphere had shifted. The divorce proceedings began formally the following week. Luke's initial offer came through his attorney, division of our personal assets, but the business remained entirely his. "I want to be fair," he said during our one direct conversation, seated across from me at a sterile conference table. "You deserve something for your contributions." I noted his hesitation, the slight diminishment of 25 years of partnership. "Of course," I replied, hands folded neatly. "Let's keep it amicable." His relief was palpable. He'd expected screaming, tears, revenge fantasies. Not this calm, accommodating woman who seemed eager to move on. The whispers reached me through the grapevine. Cassandra at a ladies' lunch with the younger wives of Luke's business associates. "She's too classy to get messy. That's why he left her." Every night I returned to our family home, the one I decorated, maintained, and filled with memories. I slept in our bed, still using only my half out of habit. During the day I established new routines. Coffee with friends who'd remained loyal. Volunteer work at the community center. Daily walks with Rusty along the lake. I declined invitations to events where they might appear. Removed myself from business functions where awkwardness would prevail. I became, in everyone's eyes, the dignified ex, gracefully fading into the background. Meanwhile they flourished publicly. Purchased a country property with expansive grounds and a charming guest house. Cassandra posted virtual tours, reclaimed wood beams, custom marble countertops, his and hers offices overlooking a private pond. I never commented. Never corrected the narrative forming around us. The successful businessman upgrading to a younger model, the devoted wife stepping aside with grace. Said I prepared. I retrieved the original prenuptial agreement from my safety deposit box. Luke's hasty signature clearly visible on the final page, including the clause regarding infidelity and business assets. I made 3 notarized copies. I consulted with Marianne Levitt weekly, compiling documentation of every company decision in which I'd played a central role. I scheduled meetings with the bank, removed my name from joint credit accounts that carried significant debt. I transferred funds from our shared emergency account, accumulated through my careful budgeting, into my personal holdings. The mortgage to our family home? Solely in my name since refinancing 5 years earlier when Luke had been traveling during the closing. His luxury car? Leased through a business account requiring my signature as a guarantor. But the true revelation waited in that prenuptial agreement. A clause Luke had never bothered to read, assuming his father's lawyer had protected only his interests. In reality, the document secured my claim to the business in the event of his infidelity. Our business. My business now. And soon Cassandra would discover exactly what she had married. A man with charm, social connections, and absolutely nothing else. The trap had been set 25 years ago. I simply needed to let him walk into it. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled among bills and grocery flyers like it belonged there. Thick cream cardstock with gold foil lettering. "Luke and Cassandra cordially invite you to share in their joy." I held it between 2 fingers, marveling at the audacity. Our divorce wasn't even finalized. My attorney assured me it wasn't illegal, just breathtakingly tactless. Jack called that evening, voice tight with outrage. "Did you get it? The invitation?" "I did," I replied, stirring pasta I was actually hungry for, a new development. "It's disgusting. Emma and I aren't going." "That's your choice," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But don't burn bridges on my account." My son's silence spoke volumes. "Mom, how are you so calm about this?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Because I'm playing chess, not checkers." The wedding was scheduled for the 3rd weekend in May. A garden ceremony at the country club where Luke had recently purchased a membership. According to the society page announcement, it would be an intimate affair celebrating new beginnings. Cassandra's social media told a different story. extensive floral arrangements, custom monogrammed napkins, a 7-tier cake. She tagged multiple posts with hashtag Future Mrs. Patton and hashtag Second Chance Love. Each carefully staged photo featured Luke looking uncomfortable in his happiness, like a man smiling through a dental procedure. I sent my regrets via the RSVP card. In the additional notes section, I simply wrote congratulations. Let them wonder at my sincerity. 2 days before the ceremony, I visited Cartwright & Sons, a high-end framing shop downtown that had been in business since my grandparents' era. Mr. Cartwright himself assisted me, a dignified gentleman who addressed me as Mrs. Patton without awkwardness or pity. Something elegant but substantial, I told him, sliding the document across the counter. He glanced at it, then at me, a flicker of understanding passing behind his professional demeanor. Silver, I think. With archival quality glass and backing. Perfect, I agreed. And gift-wrapped, please. When I returned to collect it the following afternoon, the result exceeded my expectations. The prenuptial agreement looked almost regal behind museum-quality glass, the silver frame catching light from multiple angles. Mr. Cartwright had added a subtle matte in eggshell that made the document pop. Luke's signature stood out prominently at the bottom, next to the notary's official seal. Beautiful work, I told him. It's not often I frame legal documents, he replied, carefully securing the package in silver paper and a white satin ribbon. But this one seemed significant. I nodded. More than you know. The day of their wedding dawned clear and temperate, the kind of perfect May weather that costs extra. I spent the morning in my garden, replanting perennials and pruning rose bushes that had survived decades of Michigan winters. There was something cathartic about digging my hands into the soil, creating space for new growth. At precisely noon, a courier arrived at my door. Clean-cut, professional, with a clipboard requiring my signature. Special delivery for the Patton-Whitaker wedding, I confirmed, handing him the silver package along with a generous tip. Any message with this, ma'am? He asked. I shook my head. The gift speaks for itself. 4 hours later, my phone pinged with a notification. Cassandra had gone live on Instagram, something she did regularly, curating her perfect life for eager followers. I clicked, curious despite myself. The camera panned across manicured grounds, white chairs arranged in neat rows, floral arrangements in blush and cream. Guests mingled with champagne flutes, the women in pastel dresses, the men in summer suits. The video captured their ceremony briefly. Vows exchanged beneath a flower-draped pergola, a kiss that lasted slightly too long for public consumption. Then the reception. Tables under string lights. A jazz quartet. The cake cutting approaching. I set my phone aside and poured a glass of the Bordeaux I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. At 7:43 p.m. my doorbell rang. Emma stood on the porch, still wearing her bridesmaid dress. A compromise she'd made after fierce negotiations with both me and her father. You need to see this, she said, striding past me into the living room. She pulled up a video on her phone. Not the polished livestream, but shaky footage captured by someone inside the reception. Cassandra, radiant in her fitted gown, opening gifts at a table of honor. Laughing, exclaiming, passing items to Luke, who looked increasingly bored. Then my package, distinctive in its silver wrapping. This one doesn't have a card, someone off-camera remarked. Cassandra turned the package over, examining it. Mystery gift, she said playfully. Maybe it's from a secret admirer. The camera zoomed unsteadily as she unwrapped it, revealing the silver frame. Her expression shifted to polite confusion. A photo, she guessed, lifting it from the tissue paper. Then recognition. Not of the document itself, but of what it represented. What's this? She asked, voice sharpening with uncertainty. Guests leaned closer, curious. Luke was caught in conversation across the room, oblivious. Then an older man approached, Cassandra's father, I realized. A partner at Whitaker & Associates, a mid-tier law firm known for corporate litigation. He took the frame, adjusted his glasses. The camera caught his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition to alarm. His jaw visibly tightened as he read the highlighted clause. In the event of infidelity by either party, the betrayed spouse shall retain all business equity, control of the primary residence, and full management of retirement investments regardless of contribution. He whispered something to his daughter, angling the frame away from prying eyes. Cassandra's face drained of color, the contrast against her white dress almost theatrical. Luke approached then, champagne in hand, still laughing at some joke. "What's going on? Another toaster oven? Is this real?" Cassandra asked, voice barely audible on the recording. Luke peered at the frame, confusion giving way to shock. His champagne glass tilted, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "She kept it," Cassandra muttered. "All this time." The camera captured the exact moment Luke understood. His features collapsing like a building during demolition, controlled but catastrophic. Around them, guests sensed the shift. Conversations quieted. The quartet played on, oblivious. Cassandra set the frame down with careful precision. No dramatic gestures. No tears. Just the calm deliberation of someone recalculating everything. The video ended abruptly. Emma looked at me, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Mom, did you really?" I sipped my wine. I simply returned a document that belonged equally to both of us. "But the timing was perfect," I finished. "Beginnings should be honest, don't you think?" After Emma left, I poured another glass and sat on the back porch, listening to crickets emerge in the gathering twilight. Rusty dozed at my feet, gray muzzle twitching with dreams. My phone lit up at midnight. Luke's name appeared for the first time in months. Why no? 2 words that contained volumes. Anger, shock, accusation. I considered ignoring it. Considered a dozen cutting responses. Instead, I typed the simple truth. "I wanted you both to start your future fully informed." I set my phone to silent and went to bed. For the first time since he'd left, I stretched across to his side, claiming the entire mattress. I slept dreamlessly, deeply, without waking until morning light filtered through curtains I'd finally changed to colors I preferred. Tomorrow the legal proceedings would begin in earnest. The company transfers. The asset evaluations. The conversations with employees and vendors. But tonight was for savoring the perfect delivery of the gift I'd kept safe for 25 years. Morning arrived with my phone displaying 4 missed calls from Luke, all between 6:17 and 6:42 a.m. No voicemails. No texts beyond last night's terse question. Just desperate attempts to reach me before business hours. I brewed coffee, took Rusty for his morning walk, and dressed carefully. Charcoal pencil skirt, cream blouse. The pearl earrings I'd bought myself for our 20th anniversary. Professional armor. By 9 a.m. Marianne Levitt had already emailed. "It's begun." Their attorney called. Contesting validity of prenuptial agreement on grounds of duress and unreasonable terms. Standard tactics. Nothing to worry about. Meeting at 2. I confirmed the appointment and drove to the local bakery, the one that had provided treats for company milestones and family celebrations for 2 decades. The owner, Elena, greeted me with her usual warmth but added unusual deference. Word had spread. "The usual order, Mrs. Patton?" she asked, reaching for a box. "Yes, but deliver it to the office today, please. The main conference room at 11. She nodded, understanding perfectly. Special instructions? Just the company logo. The original one. While sipping tea in the bakery's corner table, I checked social media. Cassandra had emerged from her wedding disaster with manufactured resilience. A filtered sunset photo appeared on her account, golden light strategically blurring her expression. Her caption read, "New beginnings are still beginnings." I noticed smaller changes too. Her bio streamlined, professional credentials emphasized. Marketing executive remained. Future Mrs. Patton stayed. But CO wife had disappeared like it had never existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, Luke's executive assistant for the past 8 years. A woman who had witnessed our partnership from the inside, ordering anniversary gifts on Luke's behalf when he forgot. Board members asking questions. Elle says it's a misunderstanding. Meeting called for Thursday. Thought you should know. I thanked her for the information, knowing her career now balanced precariously between old loyalties and new realities. By Monday the situation had accelerated. Marianne called while I was deadheading roses in the garden. "Cassandra Whitaker has retained Goldstein and Associates," she said without preamble. Her father apparently recommended them. Smart move but not unexpected. "What's their angle?" I asked, snipping a faded bloom with perhaps more force than necessary. Standard approach, claiming the prenup is outdated, unconscionable given current circumstances, potentially signed under duress. Marianne's tone remained unruffled. Nothing we haven't anticipated. Susan Chin, who'd served on several community boards with me, called that afternoon, ostensibly about the hospital fundraiser but clearly fishing for details. I heard there was quite a scene at the wedding, she ventured after exhausting legitimate committee business. Did you? I kept my voice neutral. Cassandra apparently broke down crying later. In the restroom. Said she didn't know what she'd gotten herself into. I murmured non-committally but filed away the information. She thought she was marrying into the company, Susan continued, unable to contain herself. Not just the man. Understandable confusion, I replied, allowing myself that small indulgence. The official letters arrived Tuesday morning. Formal notifications of intent to contest, requests for negotiation meetings, thinly veiled threats of prolonged legal battles. I forwarded everything to Marianne without reading beyond the opening paragraphs. Meanwhile, the company continued operating. I hadn't yet exercised my legal right to step in, choosing instead to watch how Luke would handle the unfolding crisis. Through Jennifer's discreet updates, I learned he'd told the executive team that everything was under control, a minor marital misunderstanding being resolved. But the company rumor mill churned relentlessly. Employees whispered about potential ownership changes. Vendors called with routine inquiries about payment guarantees. A major client postponed signing a contract renewal, citing internal review processes. By Wednesday, Luke could no longer maintain the facade. He requested a meeting through proper channels. His attorney contacting mine, who then contacted me. Do you want to take this meeting? Marianne asked. Legally speaking, you're under no obligation. I'll see him, I decided. But on my terms. My office tomorrow at 4. The office I'd selected was not Luke's expansive corner suite with its walnut desk and city views. Instead, I chose the smaller space I'd always used when working at company headquarters. No pretense, just functionality. I arrived an hour early to review documents with Jennifer and Michael, our CFO, who diplomatically maintained communication with both sides. The Q2 projections look concerning, Michael noted, sliding financial reports across the desk. 3 major accounts have put orders on hold pending leadership clarification. I nodded, scanning the numbers. And the Westridge contract? Still in limbo. Their procurement office wants assurance about who they're actually doing business with. Luke arrived precisely at 4, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. The confident stride was gone, replaced by careful movements. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his typically immaculate suit slightly rumpled. Thank you for seeing me, he began, settling into the visitor's chair across from my desk. I merely nodded, waiting. This situation. He gestured vaguely. It's affecting the business. Clients are nervous. The leadership team is confused. Understandable, I replied. Uncertainty tends to make markets nervous. He leaned forward, voice dropping. Can't we renegotiate? Work out something fair? 25 years count for something, Paige. They counted for everything, I corrected, until you decided they didn't. You're being petty. The accusation burst from him with sudden heat. This is about punishment. I regarded him calmly, remembering countless negotiations where I'd maintained composure while male clients or vendors lost theirs. No, Luke. I'm being legal. The agreement we both signed stated specific consequences for specific actions. You chose the actions. I'm simply enforcing the paperwork. That agreement was signed when we had nothing. His voice rose, then fell as he glanced toward the door. It's unreasonable now. Yet you never updated it, I noted. Not during our second refinancing. Not during our third. Not when we restructured the company 5 years ago. Your lawyer reviewed those documents each time, Luke. You signed them. Each time. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it almost triggered unwanted sympathy. Her father says it's ironclad. It is. Something in my tone finally penetrated. His shoulders slumped slightly, reality settling over him like a heavy cloak. In that moment he looked tired. Older. The handsome face that had once made my heart race now just looked worn. What do you want? He asked finally. Nothing more than what's legally mine, I answered. The company returns to my control next week. You're welcome to stay on in a reduced capacity if you wish. Or accept a severance package. He left without giving an answer, shoulders rigid with remaining dignity. Through Jennifer's network, I learned the aftermath. Cassandra had stopped attending business functions. Her social media went quiet for 3 days, then resumed with conspicuous absence of Luke or company references. Against all advice, Luke brought her to one final industry dinner the following week, a desperate attempt at normalcy. Jennifer described the evening with diplomatic restraint. Silent stares, whispered comments, the young bride's increasing discomfort as the evening progressed. 2 days later, a real estate agent I knew called with gossip she couldn't contain. The guest house on Luke's property? Cassandra moved into it yesterday. To get space, according to the housekeeper. I thanked her for the information, neither confirming knowledge nor expressing surprise. The following Monday, I formally reclaimed my office at company headquarters. Same desk, different nameplate. Paige Patton, Chief Executive Officer. No fanfare, no announcement. I simply arrived, nodded to the receptionist, and began reviewing quarterly reports. Employees stopped by throughout the day, some nervous, some relieved, all curious. I addressed each with the same calm efficiency I'd always employed. Business continues, became my mantra. Goals remain unchanged. I didn't post triumphant messages online. Didn't issue melodramatic press releases. Didn't leak stories to industry publications about the scorned wife's revenge. I simply worked. Scheduled meetings. Signed contracts. Reassured clients. Steadied the company that had always been partly mine, now fully so. With silence and precision, the same qualities that had built everything from the beginning. Seasons shifted. Leaves turned and fell. The company stabilized under my official leadership, and I settled into a rhythm I'd actually created decades ago but never claimed as my own. Patton Manufacturing Solutions became Patterson Solutions, a subtle rebrand that acknowledged history while charting a new course. The logo remained similar, just refined. Evolution, not revolution. 6 months passed. I tracked Luke's diminishing presence through industry whispers and the occasional social media post for mutual connections. He'd taken a consulting position with a former competitor, a step down from CO, but respectable enough to save face. Their holiday party photos showed him standing slightly apart from the group, smile not quite reaching his eyes. Cassandra had transitioned to lifestyle influencer status online, posting less about being a corporate wife and more about wellness routines and home decor. The guest house featured prominently, reframed as her creative studio space. Their joint appearances grew increasingly rare. I focused on what mattered: streamlining operations, pursuing new markets, mentoring promising employees. Our Q3 earnings exceeded projections. The trade publications that had whispered about leadership turmoil now praised our seamless transition and innovative direction. December arrived with its usual flurry of year-end deadlines and holiday obligations. I'd stayed late finalizing acquisition paperwork, a small competitor with complementary technology and an excellent customer base. The office had emptied hours earlier, most employees attending the holiday gala at the Westbrook Hotel across town. I'd declined to attend, sending Michael as company representative instead. Some boundaries were still best maintained. The security desk called up at 7:42 p.m. "Mrs. Patterson, there's a Mr. Patton here to see you." "No appointment." I hesitated, surprised not by his presence but by my lack of immediate reaction to it. "Send him up." I closed the acquisition file, straightened my desk and waited. The elevator timed. Footsteps approached, slower than his former confident stride. Luke appeared in my doorway, looking like a diminished version of himself. Thinner. Shoulders slightly hunched. The expensive suit hanging just loosely enough to notice. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, hovering at the threshold as if uncertain of his welcome. I nodded, gesturing to the visitor's chair, a reflex from 25 years of accommodating his presence. He sat carefully, glancing around the office I'd redesigned. The walnut panels replaced with lighter wood. His sailing trophies gone from the credenza, replaced by industry awards bearing the company name rather than his. Family photos still present, but arranged differently, focusing on the children as adults rather than the 4 of us as a unit. "You've changed things," he observed. "Updated them," I corrected. He nodded, then fell silent, seemingly lost in how to begin a conversation he'd clearly rehearsed. Is this about the Merriweather account? Asked finally. Because Michael already. No, he interrupted. Nothing like that. This isn't business. He paused. Well, it is. But it's not. I waited, unwilling to make this easier for him. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it, he said finally. Taking the company. Enforcing the prenup. I thought it was a power play. A negotiating tactic. Because you still think I'm weak, I replied, the observation calm, not accusatory. No, he shook his head. Because I never thought you cared about power. You always seemed content letting me be the face of everything. Seeming content and being content are different things, I said. But you're right about one thing, I never cared about power. I cared about what we built. His gaze tracked around the office again, taking in the subtle transformations. The conference room visible through the glass wall where my leadership team had gathered earlier, the new company logo embossed on presentation folders, the industry award we'd received last month under my direction. My team, I said, following his gaze. My decisions. My presence. Something shifted in his expression, recognition dawning slowly, painfully. You were the best part of all of this, he admitted, voice rough with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. The foundation. The reason any of it worked. And now you're not part of it at all, I observed. He exhaled slowly, hands resting on his knees. Cassandra wants out, he said finally. She's been talking to divorce attorneys. Says she didn't sign up for this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing his diminished circumstances. No, I agreed. She signed up for what I built. You gave it to her empty. His eyes reddened, a vulnerability I'd rarely witnessed during our marriage. I was stupid, he whispered. You were selfish, I corrected, not unkindly. Stupid would have been if I had stayed silent. He nodded, accepting the distinction without argument. We sat in silence for a moment, the distant hum of the heating system the only sound in the empty office. Do you know what hurts the most? He asked finally. Not the money or the company or even the humiliation. It's that I threw away the person who knew me best. Who built everything with me. I said nothing, allowing him the realization without relieving its weight. She doesn't even like jazz, he said suddenly. I took her to Montreux last month. That festival we always talked about attending. She was bored after 20 minutes. Spent the evening on her phone. I almost smiled at the absurdity. This small detail somehow embodying the entirety of his miscalculation. Emma's engaged, I said, changing the subject. She's telling everyone at Christmas. That's wonderful, he replied, genuine despite his surprise at being excluded from the knowledge. Jack. Starting his residency in July. Pediatric oncology. He nodded, pride and loss battling visibly across his features. I've missed so much, he murmured. And for what? The question hung between us, rhetorical yet demanding an answer neither of us could provide. Can we be friends? He asked finally, leaning forward slightly. Find some way back to something, I don't know. Something better than this. I studied him, this man I'd loved since I was 23. This man I'd built a life and business alongside. This man who'd discarded it all for the illusion of recaptured youth. Luke, I said gently, you were my entire life. Now you're just a signed contract I executed. The words landed with quiet finality. No malice. No triumph. Just truth. He absorbed them, nodded once and stood. No counterarguments. No pleas. Perhaps the first time in our relationship he'd accepted my boundary without negotiation. Luke walked to the door, paused as if to say something more, then continued without turning back. That was our real divorce. Not the papers filed months earlier. Not the division of assets. Not the wedding gift that exposed the truth. Just this moment of absolute clarity. No courtroom required. No shouting necessary. Reality standing firmly between us. I sat in my office, truly mine now, long after the elevator timed his departure. Not crying. Not celebrating. Just acknowledging the closing of a chapter 25 years in the writing. I didn't need revenge. Had never wanted it, really. Just a well-documented memory and good lighting to frame it. That night, I moved the framed prenuptial agreement from my study to the company archives. Not hidden away but properly filed among other historical documents. Evidence of origins, not weapons for ongoing battles. The war, after all, was over. Both sides had lost something. Both had gained something else. And in the mirror of his final recognition, I'd found something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction at his regret, but liberation from needing it at all. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal that felt earned rather than cliched. I planted new varieties in the garden, not replacing the perennials Luke and I had selected together over decades, but adding complementary colors and textures. Evolution, not erasure. The house I'd maintained for most of my adult life now truly became mine. I repainted the living room the shade of blue I'd always preferred, but Luke had found too dark. I converted his home office into a reading nook with the oversized chair I'd coveted from a design magazine. Small changes, significant only to me, which made them all the more meaningful. It's quiet now but not lonely. The silence carries possibility rather than absence. Emma visits most Sundays, sometimes with her fiancé Mark, a kind architect with thoughtful eyes who asks about the structural details of our century-old home. Jack calls twice weekly from his hospital residency, his voice tired but fulfilled as he describes patients who break and mend his heart daily. They're both careful never to mention Luke unless I bring him up first. A boundary I appreciate but have begun gently dismantling. Their father remains their father despite everything. Compartmentalization serves no one in the long term. 3 months after Luke's office visit, I received an unexpected call from Marjorie Holt, Dean of Business at the local community college. "We've developed a mentorship program," she explained. "For women re-entering the workforce after major life transitions. Your name came up repeatedly as someone who understands both business acumen and personal reinvention." I laughed softly. "Is that what I've done? Reinvented myself?" "You've reclaimed yourself," she corrected. "There's a difference." The program launched in summer. 12 women, conference room Tuesday evenings. Most over 40, some approaching 60. Divorced, widowed, laid off, or simply tired of supporting husbands' dreams at the expense of their own. They arrived with resumes listing volunteer work instead of paid positions, with half-finished degrees abandoned for family obligations, with business ideas nurtured secretly for decades. They came to me broken, starting over. Not that they would use those terms. They spoke of transitions and new chapters. But I recognized the look in their eyes, the disorienting blend of terror and possibility that comes when foundations shift. "I don't know where to begin," admitted Caroline, a former pharmaceutical sales rep who'd spent 15 years raising children while her husband built his dental practice, only to discover his relationship with his hygienist extended beyond professional boundaries. "Don't just move on, move smart," I told her and the others. "Emotion is understandable. Strategy is essential." I taught them what no business school covered: how to leverage domestic skills for professional environments, how to translate voluntary labor into marketable experience, how to recognize their own worth in a system designed to discount it. We discussed prenuptial agreements, investment strategies, intellectual property rights, the unsexy paperwork that determines futures when relationships crumble. The company continued thriving under my leadership. We rebranded officially to Patterson Solutions, my maternal family name now prominently displayed on headquarters signage and marketing materials. The transition proved beneficial. Clients appreciated the fresh perspective while maintaining established relationships. Several competitors who dismissed the leadership troubles as fatal now sought acquisition talks. People inevitably ask about Luke when I attend industry functions or charity events. Former associates probe delicately, curiosity thinly veiled as concern. I've developed a simple response: we had different goals. It's true, concise, and reveals nothing while appearing transparent. A corporate communications strategy applied to personal matters. Cassandra remarried 8 months after her separation from Luke became public. A real estate developer her own age, financially stable, socially appropriate, uncomplicated. Their wedding announcement appeared in the same society pages that had once celebrated her union with Luke, though notably more subdued in tone and scale. I heard through retail circles that she'd accepted a management position at an upscale boutique downtown, handling marketing and social media, playing to her strengths. When we occasionally cross paths at community functions or restaurants, she's unfailingly civil. No dramatic glares or pointed avoidance. Just the measured courtesy of two adults who recognize that small towns require peaceful coexistence. I hold no grudge against her. She didn't steal anything. He gave it away. She simply accepted what was offered without questioning its provenance or sustainability. Luke remains in the area, though his consulting position eventually transitioned to something more permanent with a firm in the next county. Sometimes I see his car around town, the silver Audi he purchased after the divorce, more modest than his previous vehicles but still maintaining appearances. He never honks or waves when our paths cross. He knows better. Not because I harbor anger but because we've exhausted our relevant connections. I've moved the framed prenuptial agreement from the company archives to my home study. Not displayed prominently but not hidden either. Just another document among books and photographs. I keep it not out of pride or bitterness but principle. A reminder that legal foresight isn't vindictiveness, it's self-respect. That documentation matters. That intentions without protections are merely wishes. The business mentorship program expanded to neighboring counties, then statewide. I've been invited to speak at women's leadership conferences, my story sanitized for public consumption but no less impactful for its editing. I emphasize practical protection over emotional narratives, though both have their place. The biggest myth they sell us, I tell my students, is that wives are disposable. That our contributions are supporting roles rather than foundational elements. That we are participating in someone else's story rather than co-authoring a shared narrative. In retrospect, the truth seems so obvious. I was the architect of the life Luke claimed as his achievement. He was merely the tenant, occupying space I designed and maintained. And Cassandra? She was neither villain nor victim, but the final proof that men like Luke only learn when the ink dries on consequences they never bothered to read. I didn't destroy them or their relationship. I didn't manufacture drama or orchestrate revenge. I simply enforced what was already written, what had always been there had Luke ever bothered to look. Last month, Emma announced her pregnancy at our regular Sunday dinner. As conversation bubbled around potential names and nursery colors, she asked an unexpected question. Mom, would you consider being my business partner? I want to open that interior design firm we've talked about, but I'll need help with the business side. Especially after the baby comes. You don't need me, I said automatically. You've got your degree, your experience. I want you, she interrupted. Not because I need training wheels but because we'd be good together. Different strengths, shared values. I considered her offer, recognizing it for what it was. Not a request for help but an invitation to partnership. An equal collaboration from inception, documented and acknowledged. Yes, I said. But with one condition. Everything in writing from day one. She smiled, understanding completely. I wouldn't have it any other way. So now I begin again. Not returning to the starting line, but creating an entirely new course with the wisdom of experience and the freedom of choice. A life not built around someone else's dreams or dismantled by someone else's decisions. A life I actually chose. If this tale of calculated patience and prenuptial precision had you on the edge of your seat, subscribe now to never miss another story of well-deserved comeuppance. My favorite part was when Paige delivered that elegantly framed prenup to the wedding reception, watching the dominoes fall from a distance. What was your favorite moment from Paige's masterclass in dignified revenge? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more satisfying stories of justice served cold. Hit that notification bell so you'll be first to see when we post our next video. My mother-in-law convinced my husband to put the house in her name for tax purposes. She smirked, knowing she could throw me out any time. She'd remind me I was just a guest in her home. The day she tried to evict me, I handed her a folder. Inside were documents that proved she'd made one very expensive mistake. Lindsay, darling, you've hung the hand towels wrong again. I froze in the doorway of what I'd foolishly believed was my bathroom, watching Diane refolding the cream-colored towels I'd just arranged 5 minutes earlier. Her manicured fingers worked with the precision of a surgeon, each fold crisp and deliberate, while she spoke without looking at me. The decorative edge faces out, not in. I've shown you this 3 times now. 3 times. She was counting. Of course she was counting. When I married Adam 2 years ago, I thought I was building a life with the man I'd fallen desperately in love with. the gentle soul who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning and left little notes in my lunch bag. What I didn't realize was that I'd also inherited a mother-in-law with a God complex and 27 years of practice wielding it like a weapon. Sorry, Diane. I'll remember next time. The words tasted like sawdust in my mouth, but I'd learned that resistance only made things worse. She turned then, her pale blue eyes scanning my face for signs of defiance. Finding none, she smiled, that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Of course you will, sweetheart. We all have so much to learn when we're young. I was 31. He said it like I was 12. Diane Matthews ran her household like a monarch who'd never been questioned, never been challenged, never been told no by anyone who mattered. Everything had to be her way, from the specific Christmas china we used for holiday dinners to the exact route Adam took to work each morning to avoid unnecessary traffic. The morning Adam told me about the house transfer, I was standing in that same bathroom, brushing my teeth with the toothbrush she'd replaced because mine was the wrong brand for the holder. Through the mirror, I could see him in the bedroom, fidgeting with his tie, the blue one she'd bought him because it brings out your eyes better than that dreadful brown one. Lindsay. His voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to dread, the one that meant he was about to deliver news that would change everything while pretending it changed nothing. I rinsed and turned, paste still foaming at the corner of my mouth. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom's accountant thinks it would be better for tax purposes if we put the house in her name. Just temporarily. It'll save us thousands. The toothbrush slipped from my fingers, clattering against the marble sink. Put our house in your mother's name? It's just paperwork, Lindsay. A legal technicality. He was using his reasonable voice, the one he employed when he was trying to convince himself as much as me. She's trying to help us. Help us. Right. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by those perfectly pressed lapels and shake him until he saw what was happening. What had been happening since the day we moved in with his mother temporarily, while we looked for our own place. That was 18 months ago. Dad, I smiled. Nodded. Watched my husband choose his mother over his wife. If you think it's best, I heard myself say. The relief that flooded his face was almost comical. Almost. Diane never raised her voice, she didn't need to. She had perfected the art of the surgical comment, the kind that sliced clean through your confidence and left you wondering if you were bleeding or just imagining the pain. Some women marry up, she'd say, usually while arranging flowers or folding laundry, her tone as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. Others just, hang on. Or my personal favorite, delivered with a theatrical sigh. Adam's always been so generous with strays. Strays. Like I was some mangy cat he'd found in an alley instead of the woman he'd proposed to on bended knee in front of his entire family. The warning signs had been there from the beginning. I'd just been too love-drunk to read them properly. Our wedding gifts, for instance. Beautiful, thoughtful presents from friends and family that somehow kept migrating around the house like they were searching for their purpose. The crystal vase from my college roommate appeared first on the dining room table, then the hallway console before finally settling on a bookshelf in the guest room. When I asked about it, Diane tilted her head with that practiced look of confusion. Oh, sweetheart, it looks so much better there, don't you think? The light catches it beautifully. My grandmother's china, the set I'd treasured since I was 16, found itself relegated to the back of the highest cabinet, replaced by Diane's everyday dishes that cost more than my car payment. We don't want to risk breaking something so precious, she'd said, patting my hand like I was a child who needed protection from sharp corners. Then there was the phone incident. I'd left my cell on the kitchen counter while I ran upstairs to grab a sweater. When I came back down, Diane was just hanging up, her expression serene. Who was that? I asked. Oh, just someone asking for Lindsay Matthews. I told them there was no one here by that name. My maiden name. She told my own sister there was no Lindsay Matthews at this number. Diane, that was probably my sister calling about. Well, how was I supposed to know? You should really tell people to ask for Lindsay Porter if they want to reach you. Porter. Her name. The name I was supposed to have taken completely, erasing every trace of who I'd been before Adam. But it was her habit of planning Adam's schedule that really got under my skin. She'd coordinate his work meetings, arrange his dentist appointments, even RSVP to social events on his behalf. All without consulting me. Then she'd act genuinely surprised when I mentioned having other plans. Oh dear, I already told the Hendersons we'd be at their anniversary party Saturday night. You don't mind, do you? Adam loves their parties. Did Adam love their parties? I honestly couldn't tell anymore what Adam loved versus what Diane had decided he should love. The morning after the house transfer conversation, I stood in the kitchen. Her kitchen, as I was beginning to understand, making coffee with hands that shook slightly. Adam had already left for work, kissing my forehead absently while Diane watched from the breakfast nook like a hawk observing mice. More coffee, Mom? He'd asked, not waiting for an answer before refilling her cup. She'd smiled at him with genuine warmth, the kind of smile I was beginning to realize she saved exclusively for him. Thank you, darling. You're such a good son. The emphasis on son was subtle but unmistakable. A reminder that he was hers first, mine second. After he left, we sat in silence for exactly 4 minutes. I counted before she spoke. You know, Lindsay, I hope you understand how much Adam loves this house. It's been in our family for 3 generations. Our family. Not including me, apparently. His great-grandfather built the foundation with his own hands. His grandfather added the second story. His father and I renovated the kitchen. She gestured around the gleaming space with its granite countertops and custom cabinets. Every Matthews man has raised his children here. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Adam would raise his children here too, but would I be the one raising them with him? It's a beautiful house, I managed. Yes. She sipped her coffee, studying me over the rim. I'm sure you'll take very good care of it while you're here. While I'm here. Not while we live here, or while you're part of the family. While I'm here. Temporary, conditional, subject to change without notice. That was the moment I realized I was truly alone in this marriage. Standing in what I'd thought was our kitchen. Her kitchen. While they discussed my future without consulting me, planned my life without including me, made decisions about my home without remembering that I lived there too. I excused myself and went upstairs to the bedroom Adam and I shared, closing the door carefully behind me. In the mirror above the dresser, I looked at the woman staring back, pale, tired, smaller somehow than she used to be. When had I become someone who smiled and nodded instead of speaking up? When had I started asking permission to exist in my own life? I didn't have answers yet. But looking at that woman in the mirror, I made a silent promise. I would find them. I just had no idea how much that promise would end up costing all of us. The answer to my silent promise came from the most unexpected source, and at the most unexpected time. It was 3 weeks after that bathroom confrontation, on a Thursday afternoon when the September sun painted everything golden. I was in Richard's garden, deadheading the roses he'd tended with religious devotion for the past 15 years. He'd been having what Diane called one of his good days, which meant he wasn't clutching his chest every time he stood up from his favorite armchair. I didn't expect him to join me outside. Richard Matthews was a man of quiet routines, and those routines had become even more rigid since his second heart attack 6 months earlier. Morning coffee at 7 sharp, afternoon medications at 2, evening news at 6. But there he was, walking slowly down the stone path, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea like he'd planned this moment. Thought you might be thirsty, he said, settling onto the wrought iron bench with the careful movements of someone whose body had started betraying him. Thank you. I accepted the glass, noting how his hands shook slightly, not from age but from the cocktail of medications that kept his damaged heart beating. The roses are beautiful this year. That's all you. He smiled, and for a moment I saw where Adam had gotten his gentle eyes. I haven't been much help lately. We sat in comfortable silence, watching bees work their way through the late-blooming flowers. This was how Richard and I had always communicated best. Without pressure, without performance, just 2 people who understood that sometimes the quiet said more than words. Lindsay. His voice was different suddenly, more serious. I need to tell you something. I turned to face him fully, struck by the intensity in his expression. He was studying my face like he was memorizing it, cataloging every detail. You're your father's daughter, he said finally. And that's the highest compliment I can give. My breath caught. Richard rarely mentioned my father, though I'd known they'd been friends. What I hadn't understood was the depth of that connection, how it had shaped the man sitting beside me and apparently how he saw me. Your dad and I served together in Vietnam. Did you know that? I shook my head stunned. My father had never talked much about his military service, and I'd never thought to ask Richard about it. We were 19, scared out of our minds, convinced we were going to die in some jungle on the other side of the world. Richard's voice grew distant, traveling back decades. But we had each other's backs. Boys. When I got hit by shrapnel, he touched his left shoulder absently. Your father carried me 2 miles to the medics. Saved my life. The ice cubes in my tea clinked as my hands trembled slightly. Dad never told me. He wouldn't have. That's who he was. Richard turned the glass in his hands, condensation dripping onto his khaki pants. When we came home, we started that construction business together. Matthews and Harrison, remember the sign? I did remember vaguely. A faded wooden sign in my father's garage that I'd seen as a child but never really noticed. We were going to build half the town together. Got married within 6 months of each other. I married Diane, he married your mother. We were going to be business partners, neighbors, watch our kids grow up together. What happened? Richard's expression darkened. Diane happened. She didn't like sharing me with anyone, including my best friend and business partner. Started making comments about your father's work ethic, his ideas, his family. Small things at first, then bigger ones. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This pattern was achingly familiar. She convinced me that he was taking advantage of our friendship, that I was doing all the work while he got equal credit. I was young and stupid and... He paused, shame flickering across his features. I was already learning it was easier to agree with Diane than to fight her. The construction business dissolved. My father started his own company. Richard kept the original name. They stopped speaking, stopped seeing each other, stopped being the brothers they'd been in that jungle. 32 years, Richard whispered. 32 years I let her convince me that my best friend was my enemy. I reached over and covered his weathered hand with mine. Dad never seemed bitter about it. No, he wouldn't have been. That wasn't his way. Richard smiled sadly. When he was dying, cancer wasn't it? He called me. First time we'd spoken in decades. My chest tightened. I remembered those final weeks, how my father had made mysterious phone calls from his hospital bed, conversations he'd claimed were just tying up loose ends. He didn't blame me for what happened. Said he understood how hard it was to stand up to her. But then he asked me something that's haunted me ever since. What? He asked me to watch out for you. Said you had his stubbornness but also his sense of justice. Said you'd need both with this family. Richard's voice broke slightly. He knew Lindsay. Even after all those years, he knew exactly what Diane was capable of. The garden blurred as tears filled my eyes. My father had seen this coming, had known I'd need protection in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. I promised him I would, Richard continued. But I didn't know how or when or even if you'd need it. You seemed so happy when you and Adam got engaged. So sure of yourself. I was. The words felt hollow now. I thought I was marrying into a family, not a battlefield. Richard was quiet for a long moment, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder near the fence. When he spoke again, his voice was firmer, more resolved. She's going to try to push you out, you know. It's what she does. She can't stand competition for Adam's attention, and she certainly can't stand the thought of sharing control of this family. The house transfer is just the beginning. He turned to face me fully. Lindsay, I need you to listen carefully. I've been making some arrangements. Legal arrangements. Just in case. My heart began racing. What kind of arrangements? The kind your father would have made if he'd lived to see this. Richard reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a business card. Harold Brennan. He's been my attorney for 20 years, and Diane doesn't know about half the work he does for me. I stared at the card, cream-colored, simple, with just a name and phone number. I've been asking you about your career goals, your dreams, because I needed to understand who you really are beyond what Diane sees. And what I see is exactly what your father predicted. Someone with backbone who just needs to remember she has it. The pieces began clicking together. The conversations we'd been having over the past few months. Richard's sudden interest in my thoughts about the future. The way he'd grown increasingly quiet during Diane's monologues at dinner. You've been planning something. I've been planning everything. His smile was grim but determined. Your father asked me to protect you, and I failed him once already by letting Diane destroy our friendship. I won't fail him again. A breeze rustled through the roses, carrying the scent of autumn and change. Richard stood slowly, using the bench arm for support. Harold's expecting your call. Not today, not tomorrow, but when the time comes, and you'll know when that is. Call him. Tell him Richard sent you and tell him it's time to open the package. What package? But Richard was already walking back toward the house, moving with more purpose than I'd seen from him in months. Richard, wait. He paused at the garden gate, looking back at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the gentle, defeated man who'd learned to bend to his wife's will, but someone harder, more resolute. She thinks she's won, Lindsay. She thinks she's finally gotten everything she wanted. The house, Adam's complete loyalty, and you under her thumb. His smile was sharp as broken glass. She has no idea what's coming. That night, I lay awake staring at the business card I'd hidden in my jewelry box. Harold Brennan. A name I'd never heard before, representing possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. What I didn't know then was that Richard Matthews had been planning his final act of rebellion for months. A rebellion 32 years in the making, designed to honor a friendship Diane had destroyed and protect a daughter-in-law she was determined to break. I thought it was a kind goodbye from a man who'd always treated me like the daughter he never had. I had no idea it was the beginning of my safety net, or that the gentle, quiet man everyone underestimated was about to prove he'd been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. Richard's funeral was held on a Tuesday in October, under gray skies that seemed fitting for the somber occasion. The service was small, dignified, exactly what he would have wanted. I stood between Adam and Diane at the graveside, watching them lower the man who'd become my unexpected ally into the ground, and felt a profound loneliness settle over me like a shroud. Diane played the grieving widow perfectly. Black dress, modest heels, tissues dabbed delicately at her eyes at precisely the right moments. She accepted condolences with gracious nods and spoke in hushed tones about Richard's peaceful passing, and how blessed they'd been to have so many years together. I said nothing about our conversation in the garden. The business card Harold Brennan had given me remained hidden in my jewelry box, waiting. It didn't take long after the funeral for Diane to show her full hand. 6 weeks to be exact. Just long enough for the sympathy casseroles to stop arriving and the concerned phone calls from relatives to taper off. The transformation was subtle at first. She began referring to my house instead of our house in casual conversation. When her sister called to check on how she was adjusting to widowhood, I overheard Diane say, "Oh, I'm managing fine in my own space. It's actually quite liberating." My own space. Like I wasn't sitting 10 feet away, folding laundry in what she now considered her living room. Then came the bridge club. Diane had always hosted her Tuesday afternoon bridge games, but after Richard's death, they took on a different tone. Where once she'd introduced me as Adam's wife, Lindsay, I became Adam's wife who stays at home. Never by name, always by function, always with a slight emphasis that made it sound temporary. "Oh, this is Adam's wife," she'd say when Mrs. Henderson or Mrs. Chen asked about me. "She keeps herself busy around the house." Keeps herself busy. Like I was a pet with hobbies rather than a grown woman with a college degree and a career I'd put on hold to help care for Richard during his illness. The morning everything changed started like any other. Adam was rushing around the bedroom, packing for what Diane had termed an important business conference in Denver. I'd watched her plant the idea weeks earlier during one of their morning coffee chats. "You know, darling, that Morrison account would really benefit from some face-to-face attention. Didn't you say they were having their quarterly meeting next month?" Adam had looked surprised. "I hadn't really thought about attending in person. It's a week-long conference." "Oh, but think of the impression it would make. Your dedication, your commitment to client relationships." She'd reached across to pat his hand. "I think it's exactly what your career needs right now." By the end of that conversation, Adam was convinced the Denver trip had been his idea. Now, watching him fold shirts with the distracted efficiency of someone whose mind was already elsewhere, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning. "You sure you'll be okay here with Mom?" he asked, not really looking at me as he zipped up his garment bag. "We'll be fine," I said, though something in my chest was screaming that we absolutely would not be fine. He kissed my forehead, a habit that had once felt loving but now seemed perfunctory, and headed downstairs. I heard him exchange goodbye pleasantries with Diane, heard the front door close, heard his car pull out of the driveway. The house fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stayed upstairs for as long as I could, reorganizing my closet, cleaning the bathroom, anything to avoid going downstairs and facing whatever Diane had planned. But eventually the need for coffee drove me to the kitchen. He was waiting for me. Not obviously waiting. Diane was too clever for that. She was sitting at the breakfast table with her own cup of coffee and the morning newspaper spread out before her, the picture of casual normalcy. But there was something in her posture, something in the way she looked up when I entered, that told me this moment had been choreographed. "Good morning, Lindsay. Sleep well?" "Fine, thank you." I moved to the coffee maker, hyper-aware of her eyes tracking my movements. "I'm glad Adam made it off on time. That Morrison account is so important to his future." I poured coffee into my mug, the plain white one she'd relegated me to after deciding my favorite ceramic cup didn't match the kitchen aesthetic. "Yes, I'm sure he'll do well." The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken tension. I could feel something building like the pressure before a thunderstorm. When I finally turned around, Diane was watching me with that practiced smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Why don't you sit down, dear? There's something we need to discuss." The coffee turned to ash in my mouth. I sat across from her at the table where I'd eaten hundreds of meals, trying to read the expression on her face. She folded the newspaper with deliberate precision, creating a neat rectangle beside her coffee cup. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Richard passed," she began, her voice conversational, almost friendly. "About the future, about what I want my life to look like going forward." My hands wrapped around the coffee mug, absorbing its warmth. "I've realized that I'm ready to reclaim my independence. This house has always been my sanctuary, and I think it's time I enjoyed it on my own terms again." He paused, waiting for me to respond. When I didn't, that smile grew wider, more confident. "I need you out by the weekend." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though some part of me had been expecting them for weeks. The coffee mug trembled slightly in my grip. "Excuse me. I've already contacted a moving company. They're very professional. They'll be here Saturday morning to help you pack your things." She delivered this information like she was discussing the weather, casual and matter-of-fact. I thought that would be easier for everyone involved. My mind reeled. "Diane, you can't just..." "Of course I can, sweetheart." The endearment dripped with false sweetness. "It's my house now, remember? Richard left it to me, and with the transfer Adam signed, I have complete control over who lives here." She leaned back in her chair, and there it was, that smug grin I'd learned to dread. The expression she wore when she was about to deliver what she considered a killing blow. "I'm sure you understand. A widow needs her privacy, her space to grieve properly. Having you here, well..." She gestured vaguely as if my presence was somehow offensive. "It's just not appropriate anymore." "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" "I'm sure a resourceful girl like you will figure something out. Perhaps your sister in Colorado? Or maybe it's time to reconnect with your mother's family back east." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. She'd thought this through, planned every detail. The timing, when Adam was 3 states away and unreachable during his conference sessions. The movers, already booked before she'd even told me. The suggestions about where I might go, anywhere but here, anywhere that would make it difficult for Adam to find me when he returned. "I should call Adam," I said, reaching for my phone. "Oh, I wouldn't want to interrupt his important meetings," Diane said smoothly. "You know how focused he gets during these conferences. Besides, this is really between you and me, isn't it? Between you and me. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than Adam's wife. I'm sure when you explain it to him, he'll understand completely. After all, you wouldn't want to force yourself on a grieving widow, would you?" Her voice carried just the right note of wounded dignity. "That would be rather selfish." I stared at her across the table, this woman who'd orchestrated my isolation with the precision of a chess master. Every move had been calculated, from convincing Adam to put the house in her name to arranging his convenient absence, from establishing legal control to positioning herself as the sympathetic victim. But as I sat there absorbing the full scope of her manipulation, something unexpected happened. Instead of the crushing defeat she was clearly expecting, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. Cold, sharp, crystalline clarity. My hands stopped shaking. My voice steadied. 27 years of her training had taught me not to give her the satisfaction of a visible reaction, but this was different. This wasn't surrender. This was the moment Richard had been preparing me for. "If that's what you want," I heard myself say, surprising us both with how calm I sounded. Diane blinked, clearly taken aback by my composure. She'd been expecting tears. "Please, maybe even anger she could use against me later. Instead, I was giving her nothing. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this," she said, though something in her expression suggested she found my reasonableness more unsettling than satisfying. "Can I ask for one thing?" "Of course, dear. I'd like to gather my personal belongings peacefully. No interference, no commentary. Just let me pack what's mine." She nodded, perhaps relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. "Naturally. I'm not unreasonable, Lindsay. I just think this arrangement will be better for everyone." I stood up from the table, leaving my coffee unfinished. "I'll start this afternoon." As I walked toward the stairs, I heard her say almost to herself, "I'm finally getting my house back." My house. Not our house, not the family home, her house. What Diane didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I was about to make one phone call that would change everything. Harold Brennan was expecting to hear from me. And Richard Matthews was about to have the last word after all. I walked upstairs with measured steps, my hand trailing along the mahogany banister Richard had restored himself 20 years ago. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful, like I was climbing toward something instead of away from it. The bedroom Adam and I shared had never really felt like mine. Even after 2 years of marriage, it still carried the ghost of his childhood, high school trophies on the dresser, a framed photo of him and Diane at his college graduation prominently displayed on the nightstand. My belongings had always seemed like visitors in this space, tolerated but not truly welcome. I opened the walk-in closet and pushed past the winter coats Diane had insisted I store in the back because darker colors create visual clutter. Behind them, exactly where I'd hidden it 3 days after Richard's death, was the small fireproof box I'd purchased with cash from the hardware store downtown. The combination was my father's birthday, something Richard had suggested with a knowing smile when he'd given me the folder. "Your dad would appreciate the symbolism," he'd said. Inside the box, beneath my passport and birth certificate, lay the simple black folder that had been waiting for this exact moment. I remembered the afternoon Richard had pressed it into my hands, just 3 days before his final heart attack. He'd looked frilier than usual, his skin gray with exhaustion, but his eyes had been sharp and determined. "Only if she tries to hurt you, Lindsay. Only then," he'd whispered, glancing toward the house where Diane was preparing his afternoon medications. "Promise me you'll wait for the right moment." I'd promised, not fully understanding what I was agreeing to protect. Now, holding the folder in my hands, I felt the weight of his final gift. Not just the documents inside, but the trust he'd placed in me to use them wisely. I walked back downstairs, my footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet of the house. Diane was still in the kitchen, probably savoring her victory, already mentally rearranging the furniture to erase any trace of my presence. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway, folder in hand. For just a moment, something flickered across her face, curiosity, maybe even concern, but it was quickly replaced by her practiced composure. "Decided to be dramatic about this, have we?" she said, though her voice carried less confidence than her words suggested. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the granite island she'd spent thousands renovating 2 years ago, the same island where she'd served me my final ultimatum. I set the folder down gently, my fingers lingering on its edge. "You should probably look this over before you toss me out," I said, my voice steady as glass. Diane's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. "What kind of game are you playing, Lindsay?" "No game." I stepped back, crossing my arms. "Just some light reading." She stared at the folder like it might contain something dangerous. Which I supposed it did. "I don't have time for whatever theatrical nonsense this is supposed to be." "Make time." Something in my tone must have gotten through to her because she reached for the folder with the tentative movements of someone approaching a sleeping snake. Her manicured fingers, always perfectly maintained even in widowhood, hesitated at the edge. "Richard asked me to give this to you," I lied smoothly. "Consider it his final gift." That got her attention. Diane had always been sensitive about Richard's final wishes, perhaps because she suspected he'd seen through her more clearly than he'd ever let on. She opened the folder with the careful precision she applied to everything in her life. The first document was a legal agreement, typed on cream-colored letterhead from Harold Brennan's law office. I watched her eyes scan the opening paragraph, then freeze. Her lips moved slightly as she read, as if she couldn't quite believe the words in front of her. "This is..." She started, then stopped. Started again. "This can't be legal." Trust agreement executed 2 months before Richard's death, I said conversationally. Giving me 44% ownership of all real estate and business holdings, including this house, the rental properties on Elm Street, and that little commercial building downtown where the florist and the insurance office rent space. Her hands were shaking now just slightly. She flipped to the next page, searching for some loophole, some technicality that would make this go away. Instead, she found Richard's letter. I couldn't see the words from where I stood, but I knew them by heart. Richard had read them to me that final afternoon, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. Diane has forgotten that family means all of us, not just the ones who share her blood. Lindsay has shown more grace and kindness in 2 years than some people manage in a lifetime. If you're reading this, it means she needs protection and I failed to provide it while I was alive. This is my attempt to right that wrong. Diane's face went through a fascinating transformation as she read. Confusion first, her head tilting slightly to the side like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then disbelief, her eyes widening as the implications sank in. Then something darker, more dangerous. He couldn't have done this without my knowledge, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Apparently he could. Apparently he did. She flipped to the third document, the email thread where she'd pressured Adam into the house transfer. I'd wondered how Richard had gotten access to those communications until I remembered that he'd helped Adam set up his email account years ago and probably still had the password. Her face flushed as she read her own words back to herself. I need insurance against her in case things don't work out. The house is the perfect leverage. This is private correspondence, she said weakly. Private correspondence that proves you coerced Adam into signing over the house specifically to use against me. I stepped closer to the island, close enough to see the slight tremor in her hands. That's called fraud, Diane. Or at the very least, undue influence. She was flipping through pages now with increasing desperation, looking for something, anything that would restore her advantage. Instead, she found the transcript of her phone conversation with her sister Margaret, the one Richard had recorded from the extension in his study. I'm finally going to get rid of that little gold digger. Once Adam's in Denver, I'll give her the boot. She can crawl back to whatever trailer park she came from. The color drained from Diane's face as she read her own words. She looked up at me with something approaching fear. How did you get this? Richard was more observant than you gave him credit for. I leaned against the counter, feeling strangely calm. Turns out he'd been documenting your behavior for months. The recordings, the emails, even photos of you going through my personal belongings when you thought no one was watching. That last part was a bluff. There were no photos, but Diane's guilty flinch told me I'd hit close to home. You can't prove any of this holds up in court, she said, but she was grasping now. Maybe not all of it. But the trust agreement? That's ironclad. Richard made sure of that. I pulled out my phone and showed her Harold Brennan's contact information. I called his attorney this morning. Fascinating conversation. Diane stared at the phone screen like it was showing her own death warrant. Turns out Richard had been planning this for a while. Ever since you convinced Adam to put the house in your name, actually. He knew exactly what you were trying to do and he made sure you couldn't do it. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the folder clutched in her hands like a life preserver that had turned out to be an anchor. This ruins everything, she whispered. No, I corrected gently. This ruins your plan to destroy me. There's a difference. For the first time since I'd known her, Diane Matthews looked genuinely defeated. The mask of composed superiority had slipped completely, revealing something smaller and more frightened underneath. What do you want? She asked. It was a fair question. What did I want? Revenge would have been satisfying, but as I looked at this woman who'd tried so hard to erase me, I realized I wanted something much simpler. I want you to understand that you don't get to decide who belongs in this family, I said. Richard already made that decision. And apparently he chose me. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of that grandfather clock and the soft rustle of papers as Diane's hands continued to shake. Outside, storm clouds were gathering and I could smell rain in the air. The reckoning Richard had promised was finally here. The storm clouds that had been gathering finally broke open, sending sheets of rain against the kitchen windows. Thunder rolled across the sky like an ominous soundtrack to Diane's unraveling composure. She stared at the folder for another long moment before reaching for her phone with trembling fingers. The device slipped twice before she managed to unlock it, her usually precise movements clumsy with shock. "I need to speak with James immediately," she said when someone answered. Her voice cracked on the word immediately. The first time I'd ever heard Diane Matthews sound anything less than completely in control. I walked to the tea kettle more for something to do than because I wanted tea. The familiar ritual of filling it with water, setting it on the burner, gave me time to process what was happening. 27 years of Diane's psychological warfare, and she'd just been checkmated by her own husband. "James, it's Diane Matthews. I need you to look at something immediately. No, it can't wait until Monday. Because my dead husband apparently executed a trust agreement that gives my daughter-in-law 44% of everything I own." Her voice rose with each word, the careful modulation she'd perfected over decades finally cracking. I could hear a man's voice on the other end, calm and professional, asking questions she clearly didn't want to answer. "I don't know when he did it. I don't know how he did it. That's what I'm paying you to figure out." The kettle began to whistle, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the tension. I turned off the burner and prepared 2 cups of tea, Earl Grey for me, chamomile for her. Muscle memory even in crisis. Even in the middle of a war, some courtesies persisted. I set the chamomile in front of Diane just as she was saying, "Fine. Bring the documents. Bring everything. I'll be here." She ended the call and stared at her phone like it had personally betrayed her. "Your attorney's coming over?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. "James Whitfield. He's been handling our legal affairs for 15 years. She picked up the teacup with both hands to stop the trembling. "He helped me with the house transfer. He should have known about this. This conspiracy." Conspiracy. Interesting word choice. "Maybe Richard used a different attorney for the trust," I suggested mildly. "Richard didn't use attorneys without telling me. We discussed everything." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her voice. "We always discussed everything." The first crack in her certainty. I filed it away. We sat in uncomfortable silence for the next hour, rain drumming against the windows while Diane alternated between staring at the documents and glaring at me like I'd personally orchestrated Richard's rebellion from beyond the grave. When the doorbell rang, she practically leaped from her chair. James Whitfield looked exactly like Central Casting would order for expensive attorney. Silver hair, expensive suit, briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was also, I noticed immediately, deeply uncomfortable. "Diane." He kissed her cheek with the practiced familiarity of long association. His eyes found mine across the room. "Mrs. Matthews." "This is Lindsay," Diane said curtly. "The one Richard apparently decided to enrich at my expense." "Yes." Whitfield's discomfort deepened. "I've had a chance to review the documents you described over the phone. And..." He set his briefcase on the kitchen island, popped it open with sharp clicks. "I'm afraid they're legitimate." The word, legitimate, hit Diane like a physical blow. She actually swayed on her feet. "That's impossible. Richard couldn't have executed a trust of this magnitude without my knowledge. We shared everything." "Apparently not everything." Whitfield pulled out a thick folder of his own. "I did some investigating after your call. Richard retained Harold Brennan approximately 6 months ago for what Brennan described as estate planning matters. 6 months ago. Right around the time Adam and I had signed the house transfer papers. Brennan." Diane's voice was hollow. "I've never heard of him." "He's quite reputable. Specializes in complex estate structures and..." Whitfield paused delicately. "Family protection strategies." "Family protection strategies." I almost smiled at the euphemism. "The trust is ironclad, Diane. Richard clearly had competent counsel and everything was executed properly. Witnesses, notarization, proper filing, it's all there. But surely there's something we can do. A challenge based on diminished capacity or undue influence or... I wouldn't recommend that path." Whitfield's tone turned grave. "The trust contains a no-contest clause. Anyone who challenges it forfeits their entire share." Richard was thorough. Diane sank back into her chair, the fight draining out of her like air from a punctured balloon. "What does this mean practically speaking?" she asked. Whitfield consulted his notes. "It means Mrs. Matthews, Lindsay, owns 44% of all real estate and business assets that were part of Richard's estate. The house, the rental properties on Elm Street, the commercial building downtown. And if I want her out of my house? It's not just your house anymore. He glanced apologetically at me. She has rights as a co-owner. If you can't reach an agreement. Partition sale, I said quietly. Both of them looked at me. I could file for a partition sale. Force the sale of the properties and split the proceeds according to ownership percentages. Whitfield nodded slowly. That would be within your rights. Diane's face went ashen. You'd force me to sell my home? I'd prefer not to. But if you insist on trying to evict me. I shrugged. I have options now. The irony was perfect. By putting the house in her name to gain control over me, Diane had created the very mechanism Richard needed to protect me. The transfer that was supposed to make me powerless had become the foundation of my power. How much would it cost to buy her out? Diane asked. Whitfield consulted his phone, probably checking recent property values. Given current market rates, probably close to $800,000. Cash. $800,000. I watched Diane's face as the number sank in. I don't have that kind of liquidity, she whispered. You could mortgage the properties, Whitfield suggested. Or liquidate some of your other investments. The tax consequences alone would be ruinous. Diane's financial acumen was finally working against her. And the properties have appreciated so much since Richard bought them. The capital gains would eat me alive. She was trapped. Richard had constructed an elegant financial prison, using her own greed as the bars. The tax advantages she'd been so eager to exploit had become tax burdens she couldn't escape. Her insistence on controlling everything had made her vulnerable to losing everything. There is one other option, Whitfield said carefully. What? Negotiate. Mrs. Matthews owns 44%, but she doesn't have to exercise her rights immediately. Perhaps some kind of accommodation could be reached. Diane looked at me across the table, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something approaching respect in her eyes. Or maybe it was just fear. What do you want? She asked. It was the same question she'd asked an hour ago, but the context had completely changed. Then she'd been trying to minimize damage. Now she was negotiating from a position of weakness. I want to stay in my home, I said simply. I want to be treated like a member of this family instead of an unwelcome guest. And I want you to stop trying to manipulate my husband against me. And if I agree to those terms? Then I won't file for partition sale. We can work out some kind of arrangement that lets you keep living here too. The rain had stopped while we were talking. Afternoon sunlight was starting to break through the clouds, casting everything in a golden glow that seemed almost prophetic. Diane stared out the window for a long moment, watching water drip from the eaves of the house her great-grandfather had built. Richard knew exactly what he was doing, didn't he? She said finally. Yes, I said. I think he did. She turned back to me and I saw a woman who just realized she'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing a completely different game. He was always smarter than I gave him credit for, she admitted quietly. For the first time in our relationship, Diane Matthews had just told me the truth about something that mattered. It felt like the beginning of a very different kind of conversation. That beginning of a different conversation never quite materialized the way I'd hoped. Over the following weeks, Diane and I existed in a strange kind of détente. She stopped making snide comments about my presence in her house, but she also stopped making any comments to me at all. We moved around each other like polite strangers sharing a hotel lobby, cordial but distant, each acutely aware of the shifted power dynamic but unsure how to navigate it. James Whitfield drew up a temporary agreement that allowed us both to remain in the house while we figured out a more permanent arrangement. I kept to the upstairs, she claimed the main floor as her domain. We shared the kitchen in shifts, she took mornings, I took evenings. It was civilized and completely unsustainable. Adam returned from Denver 3 days after our confrontation, rolling his suitcase through the front door with the easy confidence of a man who expected his world to be exactly as he'd left it. I was in the living room when he walked in, reading a book I couldn't have described if someone had asked me, and I watched his face as he took in the subtle changes. Diane wasn't waiting to greet him at the door. The house felt different somehow, quieter, more cautious. And I was sitting in the chair that had always been unspoken claimed as hers. How was the trip? I asked, closing the book on my finger. Good. Productive. He set down his suitcase and looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. Where's Mom? In her study. He waited for me to elaborate. When I didn't, he sat on the edge of the couch, suddenly looking uncertain. Is everything okay? You seem different. Different. Supposed I was. We need to talk, I said. I told him everything. Not the version I might have told a week earlier, careful and diplomatic, cushioned with concern for his feelings, but the truth. All of it. The years of manipulation, the calculated cruelty, the house transfer that had been designed to control me, and finally Richard's extraordinary posthumous protection. Adam listened in silence, his face cycling through disbelief, denial, and finally a kind of sick recognition. He'd known on some level. He'd always known. I can't believe she actually tried to evict you, he said when I finished. Can't you? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I always told myself she was just particular, set in her ways. I thought if I could just keep the peace between you two. You were trying to keep her happy at my expense. Yes. The admission came out barely above a whisper. I was. We talked for hours that night, the kind of conversation we should have had years earlier. Adam cried, actually cried, when I showed him the recorded transcript of his mother calling me a gold digger. He'd never heard her speak about me that way, never seen the woman she became when he wasn't watching. But knowing the truth and knowing how to live with it were different things entirely. The next few weeks were awkward and strained. Adam tried to play peacemaker, suggesting family dinners and movie nights like we could somehow pretend our way back to normal. Diane participated with the enthusiasm of someone attending a funeral. I went along with it because I didn't know what else to do. It was during one of these painful attempts at family harmony that I found the photo. I was looking for a spare phone charger in Richard's old study, a room Diane had avoided since his death, when I pulled open the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. Inside were the usual detritus of a man's life. Old business cards, reading glasses with scratched lenses, a small stack of photographs held together with a rubber band. Most of the photos were what you'd expect. Family gatherings, holiday celebrations, Adam's graduation from college. But near the bottom of the stack was one I'd never seen before. It was from my wedding day, but not one of the formal shots the photographer had taken. This was candid, unposed. Richard and me standing together during the reception, both of us laughing at something just out of frame. His arm was around my shoulders in a gesture that was purely paternal, protective. We looked like what we'd become, a father and the daughter he'd chosen. I turned the photo over and found Richard's careful handwriting on the back, in the blue ink he'd always preferred. Asterisk, she earned the Matthews name, Diane. You never did. Asterisk. I stared at those words for a long time, sitting in his leather chair that still smelled faintly of his cologne. This wasn't a message he'd written for me to find. This was a message he'd written for her. A final judgment from the man who'd spent 32 years watching her transform love into control, family into battlefield. That evening I made a decision. I found Diane in the kitchen, preparing her usual solitary dinner of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded. I'm leaving, I told her. Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or possibly regret. Where will you go? I'm buying a condo downtown, near the park. I'd made the offer that afternoon, using the equity from my share of the house as collateral. I'll be out by the weekend. She nodded slowly. And the arrangement? The legal situation. I'll sign whatever James draws up. You can buy me out over time, reasonable payments. I'm not interested in forcing a sale anymore. Why? The question seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised me. I thought about Richard's photo, about the years of small kindnesses he'd shown me, about the way he'd protected me even in death. Because Richard wouldn't have wanted me to destroy his family, even to save myself. He would have wanted me to be better than that. I placed the envelope containing the photograph on the counter between us. This is for you. From him. Diane stared at the envelope like it might bite her. When she finally opened it and saw the photo, her face went through the same transformation I'd witnessed weeks earlier. But this time, there was something else mixed in with the shock. Something that looked almost like shame. She read the words on the back, and I watched 27 years of carefully constructed self-image crumble in an instant. Not the family matriarch she'd styled herself as, but a woman who'd confused control with love for so long she'd forgotten the difference. He really did see everything, didn't he? She whispered. Yes. I think he did. She looked up at me then, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw the woman she might have been without all the armor. Smaller, more frightened, but also more human. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry for all of it. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that we could start over, that forgiveness was possible. But some things couldn't be undone with apologies, no matter how sincere they seemed. I know, I said instead. But some bridges can't be rebuilt, Diane. Some trust can't be repaired. I left her sitting in that kitchen, holding the photograph that contained her late husband's final verdict on their marriage. It felt like the most honest conversation we'd ever had. 3 days later, I packed my belongings. Really packed them this time, not the hasty evacuation she'd once demanded. Adam helped me load boxes into a rented truck, both of us crying a little as we worked. I keep thinking if I'd just stood up to her earlier, he said as we carried my grandmother's china to the truck. We all have things we wish we'd done differently. But as I drove away from the house that had never quite felt like home, I realized I didn't have as many regrets as I'd expected. Richard had taught me something valuable in those final months. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait for the right moment, that patience could be its own form of power. The condo I'd bought was small but bright, with windows that faced east toward the sunrise. I hung Richard's garden photo, the one of us with the roses, in the living room where I could see it every morning. Kept his name too. Matthews suited me better than I'd ever imagined. And somewhere in whatever place fathers go when their work on earth is done, I believed Richard Matthews was finally at peace, knowing he'd kept his promise to watch over me after all. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected phone call. Lindsay? It's Adam. I paused in my morning routine. Coffee brewing, NPR murmuring from the kitchen radio, sunlight streaming through windows that were finally, truly mine. We'd spoken exactly twice since the divorce papers were signed, both conversations awkward and brief. How are you? I asked, settling into the chair by my east-facing window. Good. Better, actually. I wanted you to know, Mom's selling the house. That surprised me. Really? She says it's too big for one person. Too many ghosts. He was quiet for a moment. She found a nice apartment in that senior community near the lake. Downsizing, she calls it. Downsizing. More like right-sizing finally. She asked me to give you something before the house sells. Dad's garden tools. She thought you'd want them. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Richard's tools. The ones he'd used to tend those roses, to teach me that beautiful things required patience and care. I'd like that very much. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory for two people learning to be friends after failing to be married. Adam looked better than I'd seen him in years. Lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying weight he hadn't realized. I've been seeing someone, he said as we sat with our drinks. A therapist. Trying to understand how I let things get so bad. That's good, Adam. Really? She says I have to stop trying to fix everyone else's problems and start fixing my own. He smiled ruefully. Apparently I have commitment issues with my own happiness. It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard him say. For what it's worth, I said, you're a good man who got caught between two strong women. That's not entirely your fault. Maybe. But choosing sides instead of choosing truth. That was my fault. We talked for an hour, easy conversation between two people who'd finally stopped trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. When we hugged goodbye in the parking lot, it felt like forgiveness. Not just his for me or mine for him, but both of us forgiving the people we'd been when we didn't know better. That evening, I planted Richard's rose bushes in the small garden behind my condo. The previous owner had left raised beds that were perfect for them, almost like he'd known they were coming. As I worked the soil with Richard's well-worn spade, I thought about the woman I'd been 18 months ago, so eager to belong somewhere that I'd forgotten I already belonged to myself. I thought about Diane, learning to live in a space sized for one person instead of an empire. I thought about Adam, finally brave enough to look at his own reflection instead of just his mother's approval. Mostly, though, I thought about Richard and the quiet revolution he'd orchestrated from beyond the grave. Not with anger or vengeance, but with the patient certainty that truth, given enough time, always finds its way to the surface. The roses would bloom again this summer. Different soil, different light, but the same essential beauty. Some things once planted with love never really die. They just find new places to grow. If this story of quiet justice had you on the edge of your seat, press that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lindsay calmly handed Diane that black folder and watched her entire world crumble in real time. What was your favorite moment? Was it Richard's secret garden conversation? The moment Diane tried to evict Lindsay? Or maybe when that attorney confirmed Lindsay owned 44% of everything? Drop your favorite scene in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible stories of karma and justice like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload when someone gets exactly what they deserve.